commentators to international conferences, establishing a significant presence in the global community while venting the voices of the sisters in Tibet. March 12, 1994 to March 12, 1995 was dedicated as the International Year of Tibetan Women.
Me and my colleague, but then more than that, I think I have my other colleagues at the back who also have, come in to support us. As per the topic, what I have planned is, I would like to share briefly how the Tibetan Women's Association and the Tibetan women shouldered the responsibility since 1950, 52, and then 1959, 1984. I think what we believe is that whether we talk about independence, whether we talk about a non-violent movement, or I think in any nation's fight, women, we have played our part of role, and I think in the previous century, the 5th decade of previous century, where we were really far away from all modern education, modern technology, but then I think when Tibet as a nation faced the most critical period in our history, I think it was Tibetan women who equally shouldered our responsibility, and we got together. We established a Tibetan Women's Association. But then, moving a little further into our history, it was in 1952. It was the Chinese established the so-called Lhasa Patriotic Women's Organization. But then, on the outer circle, or if I may say so, from the outside, their external impression was as if they had the determination, or as if they had the will to support the Tibetan. But then, in reality, it was a complete policy of the Chinese, of the Communist Chinese, to use this patriotic Women's Association as a tool for Chinese occupation of Tibet. So it was not very late, it was very soon that the Tibetan women realized, and the Tibetan people realized that, this patriotic women's organization can do more harm than help to the Tibetan people and the country. So it was in 1959, March 12, Tibetan women gathered together in Lhasa, women from all the provinces of Tibet. And when I stand here and speak to you, I would like to make a mention that when I read through the reports that we have to address to you, I would like to say that my respect to our women from 1950s have grown a number of times. It was in the last century, I think I salute and respect more them because their strategy on March 12, 1959 was very clear. They made it very clear that their struggle and their strategy is going to be non-violent. So we are now more than 50 years past 1959, and even today, if we look back, if you are completely impartial, I think we can say that their decision then in 1959, 1960s were completely devoid of any fault. And then it was very clear, our history is quite clear what happened to Tibet. China, of course, they invaded Tibet. The illegal occupation of Tibet happened in 1959. So Tibetan women inside Tibet were struggling. And if you look into our history, from only in the month of March, there were series of demonstrations, protests, meetings organized by Tibetan women, devoid of a single man in a sight. So our history is witness to how Tibetan women have shouldered our responsibility. And in exile, from 1960 itself, so 1959 and 1960, just a matter of a year, but then in 1960, Tibetan women in exile have started taking the responsibility of forming Tibetan Women's Friendship Association in Kalimpong, Gangtok, Darjeeling. Then we have the Tibetan Women's Association coming up in Rajpur, Dehradun, Mussoorie, and then we have the Tibetan Women's Association in Dharamsala. So in 1984, the Tibetan Women's Association was officially reinstated in Dharamsala with a very, very humble beginning. A humble beginning of few number of chapters of just like 700 to 800 Tibetan women as the members of the association. But today, if you look at Tibetan Women's Association, we have 56 regional chapters all over the world. We have 16,787 Tibetan women as members of the Tibetan Women's Association. And as we came into exile, Tibetan Women's Association's focus, our projects, our activities have expanded very largely. We are politically very active. We are socially active. We try to help our women economically. Very importantly, over the years, I think Tibetan women our association has realized importance of educating the Tibetan community. I think at the end of the day, if Tibet as a nation wants to progress or develop, I think it is equally important that we give education, empowerment to the Tibetan women who comprise of almost 50% of the Tibetan population. And what we do every day at TWA's office these days is quite very clear. We have the research and media desk taken care by two of my colleagues, one in Tibetan, one in English. We have all the TWA documentation, all the TWA publications, well researched, well taken care. We have a women and environment development, women's environment and development desk who looks into what's happening inside Tibet, who looks into also researching, who looks into representing Tibetans, the Tibet Third Pole, Tibetan Women's Association at international, national, local environmental meetings, summits, and using it as a platform for ourselves to voice for our people inside Tibet and of course for ourselves. And then we also have the leadership empowerment trainings throughout the year, and very importantly, I think I must make a mention that TWA's leadership trainings also have given due importance to Tibetan nuns who comprise of 3 to 4% of the Tibetan population in exile, and TWA has also started the Tibetan Nuns Project in collaboration with the Department of Religion and Cultural Affairs, but then later it was completely made an autonomous body which is now flourishing very well under the leadership of Mrs. Rinchen Kanto, and our TWA's founding president, of course. And more than that, TWA also, we try to help young school-going children, needy Tibetan people, elders. But then, what China is doing now is they're forcefully moving all the nomads from their traditional pasture lands, from their tents, from their animals, into their so-called, small, brick-sized, very concrete houses. And the consequences that the nomads and the Tibetans are facing today, it's very sad. One, many of them are unemployed. It's huge. Unemployment is increasing, and forced nomadic resettlement is adding on to this problem. Two, China's policy, what they try to do is they resettle them into small concrete houses, and we are told that, these days, what they do is they have started such systems where people can buy alcohols, drinks at a minimum rate, where they also have luxurious type of, what should I say, like spas where they can enjoy and sit. So, even if you work for the whole day, you're not going to contribute to your family's, survival, or you're not going to really, it's a method, it's a policy to, in a way to break the families, create chaos within the families also, and then at the end of the day, I think it's a complete trick to demoralize the Tibetans and the Tibetan nomads. So I think Tibetan Women's Association's Women's Environment and Development Desk, we've been trying to help indirectly or directly to our people inside Tibet. One very, not very big project, but a small attempt through our desk was to sponsor 14 female yaks to 14 nomadic family inside Tibet. That was in 2011. And then again, when we had the Yushu earthquake in 2010, what TWA did was, we sent a lump sum amount of money through a foundation based abroad, with a very clear focus and emphasis that, this money will be used for women, children, their health and their nutrition. And last year in 2012, at the end of 2012, what we managed was that we could send a lump sum amount through a foundation based in United States to help young nomadic women to go to school or further, pursue their studies. So, what's happening inside Tibet to the nomads is something, completely uncalled for. And but then I think at the end of the day, it's the policy or the ultimate goal of the Chinese regime is to completely annihilate Tibetans. I hope my answer was fine for you.
We could go on for days
talking
about all this stuff. Is that mic working? Can everyone hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
All right.
First of all, I know you said you wanted to concentrate on women in Tibet, but they happen. And they're happening a lot. But in public, I'm interested to know, what are the initiatives such as, rape crisis center or rape places where people can go report rape and sexual abuse? So that's the first question. And then the other question is I know there's been a report published recently about the status of Tibetan women in exile, and I was reading some of the findings there, and one of the things that struck me was still how many Tibetan women in exile are still the fundamental homemakers. And one of the recommendations was to increase women in work and in government. And I wanted to know what the CTA and Losang Sengye, Sikh and Losang Sengye, what their reaction and what are they actually doing to kind of implement these recommendations?
TWA's leadership trainings, such as the advanced leadership training that we started in 2010, our sole objective when we started in 2010 was completely, we looked at, what CTA doing, especially in terms of women at the decision-making level, women in leadership roles, and so that was the complete objective, to increase or to encourage and inspire our women to take up more challenging leadership roles in our community. So TWA's leadership training so far is the 4th series coming soon in December in Delhi, from 25th to 31st of December in Delhi. So we are, yes, with an objective to always with the aim to women in education, women in health, women and more than that, I think all the problems such as prostitution, such as one-child policy or the family planning policy that China has implemented in Tibet. I'll start with women in education. To begin with, women in education, I think in terms of many of the things like health care, education, Tibet remains one of the most underdeveloped or marginalized part of China. And Tibetan Women's Association in December 2011 and January 2012, we managed to interview some women who have come from Tibet for Kala Chakra prayers, and TWA is in fact coming out with a report by November 2013, which will completely focus on Tibetan women's status inside Tibet. And I think that will be a good copy to grab and to read through to know more about what's happening inside Tibet. And then in terms of education, I think one major problem is, they're replacing Tibetan with Chinese language. And I think it's pretty much clear for a nation or for anybody to, I think without the Tibetan language, I don't know if Tibet will ever exist. So, it's our identity. But then, China, what China is doing is completely, they're trying to replace everything in Chinese. And in terms of schools, many of the Tibetan women who we interviewed for our upcoming report have mentioned it very clearly that, the distance is huge. Many of them have to travel by 6 hours. Many of them many of them have said that, we have to travel like a day to get to a school. So many choose not to send their children to school also. So that is also there. And then again, if we see, but then, if we talk about the international reaction towards the status of education inside Tibet, the reaction has been very timid, if I can say so. It's only been the European Parliament who passed one resolution, November 23rd, 2010, calling for China to preserve and protect Tibetan culture, religion, and our national identity. But then, other than that, what's happening inside Tibet is pretty much something that we would not, wish for, and we really do not agree with what's happening inside Tibet. And then I would like to give you one instance of 2006, the Nangala Pass. It said that 75 Tibetans tried to escape through the Himalayas to come into exile with the hope of getting better education facilities or opportunities, but very sadly they were shot, and only 41 out of 75 could get to Nepal and then to the Ramsala, of course. But then that incident saw a Tibetan nun being shot at the back of her head, a Tibetan man, 23-year-old, being shot twice in his leg, who died the next day, and the Chinese troops come next day to pick up his dead body. So such is the courage that our people are taking to escape into exile, hoping for better educational opportunities. And so I think these instances in itself, testifies or illustrates, the educational opportunities inside Tibet, and how the Tibetans are not happy inside Tibet. And then also a bit on employment. If we focus a bit on employment, it's very clear again, most of the better positions are reserved for Chinese. And then also there's something very contradictory. They bring in mass Chinese into Tibet, and they find jobs easily inside Tibet. But what China is doing exactly is, they're taking away all our natural resources to China. So I don't know, they take the natural resources to China, and then people work inside China as well. But then, they influx their own people into Tibet, and make it more difficult for Tibetans to get jobs, which is already a huge competition. And then there are instances where they have a separate wage or a salary. If you are a Tibetan, you'll be paid this much. If you are a Chinese, you'll be paid more. They put the advertisements, should I say, and they make it, they make clear mentions. They discriminate, and then they show it, and then there's, at some instances we have been told that, there are job announcements, and they say Tibetans do not apply. So such is, the discrimination that our people are facing inside Tibet. And then some Tibetan women, they have said in one of our testimony that, Tibetans believe that men are superior to women, but Chinese believe, Chinese are superior to Tibetans. So, women kind of sometimes, it's their mindset, is their thinking, but then, they feel, discriminated, two times, double discrimination, if I may say so, So, such is what's happening inside Tibet. And then if we talk about prostitution, prostitution has been growing a lot since 1980s. And then one of the testimonies says that prostitution has grown a lot in the 90s. And, prostitution is not legal, of course, But then there are many bars, especially the popular Tibetan Nyima bars, and then karaoke bars, which kind of it's very popular where prostitution flourish. And moreover, very sadly for us as Tibetans, one of the writers in his report, he has mentioned very clearly that the Lhamo area, very popular religious, supposedly to be religious area for Tibetans. Lhamo in
Are you talking about Lhasa?
Yes, Lhasa. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Lhamo area, which is supposed to be religious, sacred, to be respected, are now full of brothels. So this is, it's completely disrespecting our religion, our beliefs. More than that, it's creating platforms and avenues for, prostitutions to grow. And then some also say that, especially near Potala also, there are many brothels, which kind of, so it's very, I don't know, for Tibetans, it's, not acceptable, to see our sacred places, to see our palace, to, to be based along the same lines, such as, brothels and all these things. And, and then more than that, I think one of the scariest things is, the health, sexually transmitted diseases that, will be, again, another great consequences of such things happening around. And if I would like to say a bit about torture, women and torture. Torture, it's very clear. It's either physical or psychological. Physical attacks on body. Psychologically, it just affects, the mental status of the detainees or the people. But very importantly, to make a specific mention about torture against women is that, because you are a woman, there are more certain, prescribed grave methods in which or ways in which they torture you because you are a woman. And I really do not want to mention in detail, but I think I'd rather mention one very important testimony from that I found as I read through, is that one woman, in her testimony to Human Rights Watch, in an article published in November 2009, just 2-3 years ago, she said that they would take her to men's prison and leave her there to be raped by the detainees. So, you see, such is the testimony coming out of former detainees from Tibet, and I think what we believe is that, it kind of remains, these forms of torture remains common and universal to most of the women who are, detained or imprisoned. And
why would a Tibetan woman be put in prison? What does she have to do to get herself put in prison?
Well, detentions, arrest, disappearance, killing, tortures, whatever is happening inside Tibet is just because Tibetans are calling for freedom inside Tibet. Tibetans are calling for a dignified return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to his own homeland. But then I would also like to make it very clear that the demonstrations, the protests organized by Tibetans inside Tibet has never been violent. We have maintained a non-violent strategy, and the consequences or the response from Chinese side of arrest, detention, beating, killing, shooting is a clear indication that the hardcore policies of Chinese is a complete failure. And it's very sad that China has to respond to a peaceful demonstration, to a peaceful non-violent struggle in such harsh and grave manner. So it is completely their failure, but I think Tibetans is not going to give up, and Tibetan Women's Association.
Sex trafficking is on the increase.
Yeah.
And I just wondered whether, in terms of that's kind of more to do, because Tibetan men are also using Tibetan prostitutes in Lhasa, I assume, right?
Yeah.
Are they? Feminist groups who are fighting prostitution, not just all over the world. It's a massive issue.
So you mean our plans?
Yeah, like with the Tibetan Women's Association, would it join with other groups fighting prostitution and sexual objectification of women and sex trafficking of women globally? Is there any way that could become more of a solidarity as opposed to just purely a Tibetan thing?